Fine, let's start. Number 1. The banana languages of pre-Sumerian Mesopotamia. Long before any human pressed a wedge into clay, the southern alluvium of what is now Iraq was already home to farmers, priests, and metalworkers. The Ubaid culture began building mud brick temples at Eridu around 6500 BCE, nearly 3,000 years before the first written sentence appeared on Earth. By the time Sumerian scribes began recording their language on tablets at Uruk around 3300 BCE, the words they wrote already carried fossils inside them. Loanwords, theonyms, place names, vocabulary that did not belong to the language doing the writing. The Assyriologist Igor Diakonov was among the first to take this seriously in the mid-20th century. He proposed that at least 2 earlier languages had been spoken in the region before Sumerian arrived. He called one Proto-Euphratean, associated with the southern urban world, and another Proto-Tigridian, associated with the more northern alluvium. The Spanish linguist Gonzalo Rubio later gave this substrate its memorable nickname. The names of many early Mesopotamian deities follow a repeating consonant-vowel, consonant-vowel, consonant-vowel pattern. Inanna, Zababa, Benin, Kubaba. They sound structurally a little like the word banana. The vocabulary is the most suggestive evidence. Sumerian words for farmer, angar, and plow, apin, lack convincing internal etymologies. The same is true for metallurgical terms like urid, meaning copper. River names like Baranun and Idiglat, and city names like Kish, Larsa, and Lagash carry suffix patterns alien to Sumerian morphology. Not everyone agreed. In a sharp 1999 paper in the Journal of Cuneiform Studies, Rubio himself argued that many so-called substrate words were better explained as ordinary loans between contemporary languages, Sumerian, Akkadian, and Hurrian, rubbing against each other in a multilingual region. For nearly 2 decades, the skeptical position dominated. Then, in 2017, Christian Hess concluded that the substrate evidence, while fragmentary, was more robust than the consensus had allowed. Manfred Kribernick had cataloged additional non-Sumerian divine names in the early dynastic temple lists at Farah and Abu Salabik. The substrate likely went extinct between 3500 and 2500 BCE as Sumerian became the prestige written tongue, and Akkadian, the Semitic newcomer, swept in under Sargon around 2350 BCE. The banana languages left only their bones inside another language's mouth. Number 2. The Pre Greek Substrate. Move west across the Mediterranean into the Aegean. Listen to the place names: Knossos, Corinth, Mycenae, Parnassos. Talissos, Halicarnassos, none of them are Greek. They share suffixes sos, nenthos, ine, imna that do not belong to any Indo-European language. They belong to a tongue that was spoken in the Aegean before Greek arrived, and which Greek inherited as a layer of older vocabulary it could never quite shake. The German classicist Paul Kretschmer first catalogued the pattern in 1896. His Einleitung in die Geschichte der griechischen Versprache laid out hundreds of toponyms whose phonological shape made them strangers in Greek. In 2010, the Dutch linguist Robert Beekes published his Etymological Dictionary of Greek and identified roughly 1,000 pre-Greek words. He proposed a phonology with prenasalized stops and a 4-way stop contrast, unlike anything in any Indo-European language. Words for olive, elea, for wine, oinos, for the labyrinth itself, labyrinthos, belong to this layer. The things Greeks were proudest of had borrowed names. There may be a wider family at work. In 1998, the German linguist Helmut Rix proposed that pre-Greek, Etruscan, the Alpine language Raetic, and the language of the Lemnos stelae all belonged to a single non-Indo-European family. He called it Tersenian. The Lemnos stele itself, found on the Aegean island of Lemnos in 1885 and dated to the 6th century BCE, shows structural features close to Etruscan, giving the hypothesis a real anchor. Linear A. The undeciphered script of Minoan Crete, used between roughly 1800 and 1450 BCE, almost certainly records a pre-Greek language, possibly Tersenian. Nobody has cracked it. Genetic evidence complicates the picture without resolving it. In 2021, a study by Cosimo Postest and colleagues in Science Advances analyzed Etruscan ancient DNA and found genetic profiles closer to other Italians than to Anatolians. This makes the Greek historian Herodotus's claim that the Etruscans migrated from Lydia harder to accept at face value. But it does not falsify the Tersenian hypothesis. Languages and genes do not always travel together. The Minoan civilization, which flourished between 3000 and 1450 BCE, almost certainly spoke a pre-Greek language. Late survivals like the Eteocretan inscriptions of the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, written in Greek script but recording an unknown language, suggest the pre-Greek world persisted in pockets long after the Indo-European arrival around 2200 BCE. We can hear the shape of these tongues without ever recovering a sentence. Number 3. The Harappan language of the Indus Valley. The Indus Valley civilization, which flourished between 3300 and 1300 BCE, covered roughly 1 million square kilometers across what is now Pakistan and northwest India. That makes it larger by area than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined at the same period. Its great cities, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dholavira, Rakhigarhi, and Lothal, supported a population estimated at 1 to 5 million people at peak. The civilization left behind one of the most distinctive material cultures of the Bronze Age. It also left behind around 4,000 inscribed objects bearing a script that no one has ever read. The Indus script is short. The average inscription is only about 5 signs long. There are no long texts, no king lists. The longest single inscription, the Dholavira signboard, contains 10 large signs over 3 meters wide, found above a citadel gateway in 1991. It is unreadable. The leading interpretation is the work of the Finnish Indologist Asko Parpola. In his 1994 book, Deciphering the Indus Script, he proposed that the script encodes an early form of Dravidian, the family whose modern representatives include Tamil, Telugu, and Malayalam. His evidence rested on rebus readings. The fish sign, he argued, stands for the Dravidian root mean, which means both fish and star, fitting the iconography of certain seals. It remains contested. In 2004, Steve Farmer, Richard Sproat, and Michael Witzel argued in The Collapse of the Indus Script thesis that the inscriptions are not language at all. Too short, too statistically odd. In 2009, Rajesh Rao and colleagues at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai used conditional entropy analysis to show that Indus signs behave statistically like a linguistic script. A potential threat of survival exists. Brahui, a Dravidian language spoken today by perhaps 2 million people in Balochistan, sits geographically isolated from the rest of the Dravidian family. Some scholars take it as a relict of the original Indus-era range. Vedic Sanskrit carries hundreds of substrate words for rice, plow, village, sesame, peacock, all without Indo-European etymology. Many of them may be Harappan. Between 1900 and 1300 BCE, the cities emptied. The monsoon weakened. The Gagar-Hakra river system dried up. Ancient DNA work by Vagish Narasimhan and Vasant Shinde, published in 2019 in Science and Cell, showed that Harappan-era populations were genetically distinct from later Indo-Aryan speakers, supporting a story of significant linguistic replacement. A bilingual would crack the script. A single tablet with Indus on one side and Akkadian or Sumerian on the other would settle everything. Despite extensive trade with Mesopotamia, where Sumerian records mention Meluha as a distant trading land, no such bilingual has ever been found. The Tamil Nadu government has offered a $1 million prize for decipherment. It remains uncollected. Number 4. Hattic of pre-Hittite Anatolia. Central Anatolia in the late 3rd millennium BCE was the homeland of a people called the Hatti. They were not Indo-European. Around 2000 BCE, the Hittites, an Indo-European population probably originating to the north, conquered the region. What happened next is unusual. Instead of erasing Hattic, the Hittites kept it alive inside their own temples as a sacred liturgical tongue. The closest modern analogy is medieval Latin in the Christian Church. The Hittite capital Hattusa, near modern Boğazkale in central Turkey, has been excavated since 1906, first by Hugo Winkler and later by the German Archaeological Institute. The site has yielded around 150 Hattic ritual texts. Many are bilingual. Hattic on one side, Hittite translation on the other. This is what makes the language partially reconstructible. The German Hittitologist Emil Forer first recognized Hattic as distinct in 1916 by noticing that certain tablets carried the colophon Hattili. The structure is striking. Hattic is agglutinative with prefixing morphology. Hittite is suffixing. The two languages work in opposite directions. A small vocabulary survives. Kate means king. Kazue means priest. Teru is the storm god. The Hittite royal title Tabarna is itself a Hattic loanword, the conquerors taking even their throne name from the people they had subjugated. The Hittites adopted Hattic deities wholesale. The sun goddess of Arinna, the storm god Teru, the goddess Inara, all entered the Hittite pantheon and were worshipped in their original language. The Yazilikaya rock sanctuary near Hattusa, built in the 13th century BCE, depicts these deities alongside Hittite and later Hurrian gods in a layered syncretism. The affiliations of Hattic remain debated. Vyacheslav Ivanov, and more recently, John Colarusso, have argued for a Northwest Caucasian connection, citing parallels with modern Abkhaz and Adagian. Others see Hattic as a true isolate. An older proposal linking it to Hurrian and Eurasian is largely discredited. Sebastian Seusel's 2004 monograph Hattischer Wortschatz in Hethitischer Textüberlieferung remains the standard lexicon. Hattic died as a spoken language probably by 1500 BCE and survived as ritual recitation until at least 1200 BCE. The Bronze Age collapse destroyed Hattusa, ended Hittite literacy, and ended the priestesses known as the Old Woman, Munushu Ge in cuneiform, who had carried the chants forward. The Hittites continued to call their land the land of Hatti, and Biblical Hebrew preserved the term as Hittim, the Hittites of Genesis, a downstream memory of the same root. Number 5. The Vasconic Family. Today, around 750,000 people in the Western Pyrenees of Spain and France speak Basque, called Euskara by its speakers. Basque is the only surviving pre-Indo-European language of Western Europe. Its grammar, vocabulary, and morphology bear no demonstrable relationship to any other living language on Earth. The question of where it came from is the question of what Europe sounded like before the Indo-European wave. The German linguist Theo Veneman of the University of Munich has championed the most ambitious answer since the mid-1990s. He calls the proposed family Vasconic and argues that Basque descends from a once vast group that covered much of pre-Indo-European Europe. His evidence is hydronymic. River names across the continent show consonant clusters, R as that he reads as Vasconic morphology. Garonne in France, Aragon in Spain, Isar, and Iller in Germany. Mainstream linguistic opinion remains skeptical. Most scholars accept Basque as a genuine isolate. Venzman's macro comparison is considered suggestive, rather than proven. But the documentary trail, from Basque to its known ancestor, is well established. Aquitanian, attested in around 400 Roman-era funerary inscriptions from southwestern Gaul between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, is the direct ancestor of Basque. Personal names like Nescato, Cisan, and Andere survive into modern Basque as Nesca, girl, Gazazan, man, and Andre, woman. The Spanish linguist Joaquín Gorochategui has done the foundational epigraphic work since 1984. Genetics has added a layer. In a 2015 study in Nature, Inigo Olalde and colleagues found that Basques carry an unusually high proportion of the Y chromosome haplogroup R1b DF27 and retain pre-Indo-European autosomal signatures. The Bronze Age genetic turnover that swept Central Europe between 3000 and 2000 BCE only partially affected Iberia's western coast and the future Basque region. The Pyrenees and the Atlantic edge of Iberia were defensible. The steppe horsemen did not fully reach them. Typologically, Basque is alien to its neighbors. It uses ergative absolutive alignment, in which the subject of an intransitive verb is marked the same way as the object of a transitive verb. This pattern is rare in Europe but common in the Caucasus and Australia. Its numerals are vigesimal base 20. Barangay 220s means 40. Echoes of vigesimal counting persist in Old Celtic, in French 4-20 for 80, and in Danish, possibly remnants of wider Vasconic substrate influence. The cave painting cultures of Cantabria and Aquitaine, Altamira, and Lascaux around 17,000 BCE may have been ancestral Vasconic speakers. 3 possibilities sit on the table: Basque as a true isolate, mainstream; Vasconic as a real macro family that once covered Europe, plausible; or the controversial DNA Caucasian proposal linking Basque to Caucasian, Sino-Tibetan, and Na-Dene, fringe. What is certain is that Basque is a coelacanth, a living window into a vanished world. Number 6. Proto Afroasiatic. The Afroasiatic family includes Egyptian, Berber, Semitic, which contains Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, and the extinct Akkadian, plus Cushitic, Omotic, and Kattic, the last of which contains Hausa with its roughly 70 million speakers. The family covers around 500 million speakers and is the 3rd largest by population after Indo-European and Sino-Tibetan. its reconstructed ancestor, was spoken between 12,000 and 18,000 years ago, older than agriculture, older than the Neolithic Revolution. The American linguist Christopher Ehret has done the most comprehensive lexical reconstruction. His 1995 book, Reconstructing Proto Afroasiatic, identifies roughly 1,000 reconstructed roots. The diagnostic features are striking: pharyngeal consonants, the rasping sounds in Arabic, and ha. Triconsonantal root structures in Semitic, where the three-consonant skeleton KTB carries the core meaning of writing, and the vowels specify grammatical form. Gender prefixes in pronouns in Berber, where T prefixes mark the feminine. The homeland is debated. The leading proposal places Proto Afroasiatic in Northeast Africa, with the British linguist Roger Blench and Ehret as principal advocates. A minority view places it in the Levant. The branching order is reasonably clear. Amharic, spoken in southwest Ethiopia, split off first, making it the most divergent branch. Cushitic split next, followed by Chattic, then Berber, then Egyptian, with Semitic as the last to diverge. Climate shaped the family's geography. During the Holocene wet phase between 9,000 and 5,500 BCE, the Sahara was green. Lakes covered what is now sand. Pastoralists herded cattle across landscapes that today cannot sustain a tent. The rock art of Tassili N'Ajjer in southern Algeria depicts these herders, who may have been Proto-Berber speakers. As the Sahara desiccated, populations moved north toward the Mediterranean and east toward the Nile. A 2021 study by Iosif Lipson and colleagues in Nature found that Afroasiatic speakers across Africa share signatures of a back-to-Africa migration from the Near East around 6000 BCE. The Natufian culture of the Levant, dated between 12,500 and 9,500 BCE, has been speculatively linked to early Afroasiatic speakers. The Natufians lived in semi-sedentary villages and harvested wild grain. When writing arrived, Afroasiatic was ready. Egyptian hieroglyphs appeared around 3200 BCE. Akkadian cuneiform appeared by 2350 BCE. Egyptian phonology preserved ancient Afroasiatic structure, including the triconsonantal root system that later defined Semitic. Reconstructed vocabulary across all branches includes words for cattle, sheep, and grain, confirming pastoralism and proto-agriculture at the Proto-Afroasiatic stage. Only the lowest numerals, 1 and 2, reconstruct across every branch. The original counting system was simple. Number 7. Proto-Sino-Tibetan. Around 1.4 billion people today speak a language descended from Proto-Sino-Tibetan. That is 1 in 5 humans alive. The family contains approximately 400 languages and includes the Sinitic branch, with Mandarin, Cantonese, and Hokkien, the Tibetic branch, with Tibetan and Dzongkha, the Burmese branch, and roughly 300 smaller languages. It is the second largest by population after Indo-European, and its ancestor was spoken roughly 7,200 years ago. That dating comes from a Bayesian phylogenetic study by Menghan Zhang and colleagues in 2019 in Nature. The study used computational methods on cognate vocabulary across 109 Sino-Tibetan languages and converged on a homeland in the upper Yellow River Valley, in what is now Gansu and Shaanxi provinces of China. The relevant archaeological cultures are the Yangshao, which flourished between 5000 and 3000 BCE, and the slightly later Majiayao. Both cultivated millet, and the reconstructed word for millet shows up across multiple Sino-Tibetan branches. Not everyone accepts the Yellow River homeland. Roger Blench and the Dutch linguist George van Driem have argued for a southwestern origin in northeast India or northern Burma. The matter is not closed. The split between Sinitic and Tibeto-Burman is estimated at 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. The diagnostic features are surprising for anyone whose picture of these languages is shaped by modern Mandarin. Tone systems are not original. Proto-Sino-Tibetan was not tonal. Tone developed independently in Sinitic, Tibetic, and Burmese after the loss of final consonants. What was original was monosyllabic root structure and classifier systems for counting nouns. James Matisoff at UC Berkeley has led the largest lexical reconstruction project since 1987, the Sino-Tibetan Etymological Dictionary and Thesaurus. Core reconstructed vocabulary includes ma for mother, pa for father, mt for I, nis for two, and na for I. Writing came thousands of years later. Old Chinese, the earliest attested Sinitic, dates from 1200 BCE in oracle bone inscriptions. Its phonology has been reconstructed in detail by William Baxter and Laurent Sagart in 2014. Tibetan was first written only in the 7th century CE. Burmese was first written in the 11th century CE. Proto-Sino-Tibetan was spoken roughly 6,000 years before any descendant was written down. The expansion was vast. Tibeto-Burman speakers spread west into the Tibetan Plateau by around 4000 BCE and south into Burma and northeast India by 3000 BCE. Sinitic expanded from the Yellow River south to the Yangtze, displacing or absorbing Tai-Kadai, Hmong-Mien, and Austroasiatic populations. Han Chinese, Tibetan, and Yi populations share the Y chromosome haplogroup O2AM122. A speculative Sino-Caucasian hypothesis from the Russian linguist Sergei Starfestein would link Sino-Tibetan to Caucasian and to Yeniseian in Siberia. Mainstream linguistics rejects this. Number 8. Proto Uralic. The Uralic family contains around 38 languages spoken by roughly 25 million people, mainly in Russia, Finland, Estonia, Hungary, and the Arctic. The major branches are Finnic, with Finnish, Estonian, and Karelian, plus Sami in Lapland, Hungarian as an outlier far to the south, Mansi and Khanty in western Siberia, and Samoyedic, which includes Nenets, Selkup Enets, and Nganasan. The reconstructed ancestor was spoken between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago. The traditional homeland was placed in the boreal forest between the Volga River and the Urals. The Finnish linguist Juha Janhunen in 2009 shifted this east, arguing for western Siberia, just east of the Urals, with the westward spread to Finland happening only in the early Bronze Age. The diagnostic features include agglutinative morphology, vowel harmony, postpositions instead of prepositions, and no grammatical gender. Core vocabulary is deeply preserved. Kala for fish, Vesi for water, Suli for lap, Mun for egg, Unti for sleep. These reconstruct cleanly across branches. Genetics has confirmed the family's spread. In 2019, Letty Sag and colleagues, in Current Biology, traced the Y chromosome marker N1CL392 to a Siberian origin, and found that it spread west with early Uralic speakers around 4,000 years ago. Uralic speakers across Europe and Siberia carry this marker at much higher frequencies than their Indo-European neighbors. There is also a deep contact layer with Indo-European. Hundreds of Proto-Indo-Iranian loanwords entered Proto-Uralic, dating their close geographic proximity to around 3000 BCE. Some scholars have grouped Uralic and Indo-European into the controversial Indo-Uralic or broader Nostratic macro families. These remain speculative. The first written Uralic language was Hungarian, in the funeral sermon dated around 1192 CE. That is more than 5,000 years after Proto-Uralic was spoken. Finnish was not written until the 16th century by Bishop Mikhail Agricola. The Samoyedic branch is the most divergent and split from the rest of Uralic around 4,000 years ago. Hungarian itself split from its closest relatives, Mansi and Khanty, around 2,500 years ago, and the Hungarian-speaking community migrated to the Carpathian Basin only in the 9th century CE. Today, Hungarian speakers are surrounded by Slavic, Germanic, and Romance languages, with no other Uralic speakers within 1,000 kilometers. Sami languages preserve a unique reindeer, herding vocabulary used to date the entry of reindeer pastoralism into the Uralic world. Modern Uralic speakers form linguistic islands surrounded by Indo-European and Turkic languages, a testament to how Uralic survived the Bronze Age Indo-European wave. The horses of the steppe could not reach the northern forests, and the language of the forests endured. Number 9. Proto Austronesian. The Austronesian family contains approximately 1,200 languages, spoken by around 386 million people across Madagascar, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, and Taiwan. The geographic span, from Madagascar in the west to Easter Island in the east, and from Taiwan in the north to New Zealand in the south, is the largest of any pre-modern language family. No group of speakers before European maritime expansion in the 16th century had covered more of the planet. The homeland is Taiwan, with a time depth of roughly 5,000 to 5,500 years ago. The American linguist Robert Blust is the central figure in Proto-Austronesian reconstruction. His 2009 reference work, The Austronesian Languages, remains the definitive treatment, with a reconstructed phonology of roughly 25 consonants and 4 vowels. Diagnostic features include a focus and voice system on verbs, reduplication for plural and intensification, and a distinction between inclusive and exclusive forms of we. The out-of-Taiwan model, developed by the Australian archaeologist Peter Bellwood beginning in 1991, traces the Austronesian expansion from Taiwan's Neolithic Dapenkeng culture around 4000 BCE southward through the Philippines, Indonesia, and into the Pacific. The Lapita pottery complex, with its distinctive dentate stamp designs, marks the Austronesian arrival in Melanesia and Western Polynesia around 1500 BCE. A 2009 study by Russell Gray, Alexei Drummond, and Simon Greenhill in Science used computational phylogenetics on Austronesian vocabulary to confirm the out-of-Taiwan model with a root age of around 5200 years before present. Lipson and colleagues in 2014 and Skoglund and colleagues in 2016 documented Taiwan origin ancestry in Polynesian populations. Then came the Great Voyages. From a base in Tonga and Samoa, Polynesian seafarers reached Hawaii around 1000 CE, Easter Island by 1200 CE, and New Zealand by 1250 CE. Westward, Austronesian speakers crossed from Borneo to Madagascar around 500 CE, creating Malagasy, spoken 7,000 kilometers from its nearest relatives. The Lapita expansion is the most striking compression of distance and time. In just 200 to 300 years, between 1500 and 1200 BCE, Austronesian speakers colonized 4,500 kilometers of Pacific, from the Bismarck Archipelago to Tonga. The enabling technology was the outrigger canoe, reconstructible to Proto-Malayo-Polynesian, the stage just after speakers left Taiwan. Open ocean voyages required navigational expertise rediscovered in the modern era by the Micronesian navigator Mau Pialug in 1976. His voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti revived the Polynesian Voyaging Society and reframed the question of how the dispersal had actually happened. Writing came late. The earliest written Austronesian languages were Cham in Vietnam around the 4th century CE and Old Javanese around the 8th century CE, both using Indian-derived scripts. Proto Austronesian was spoken roughly 5,000 years before any descendant was written down. The 10 surviving Formosan languages of Taiwan, spoken by the Atayal, Paiwan, and Bunan peoples among others, preserve the deepest branches of the family. 3 theories on the origin still circulate. The mainstream out-of-Taiwan model. A fringe slowboat from Wallacea hypothesis from the British author Stephen Oppenheimer, and a minority view placing the origin in mainland Southeast Asia. Number 10. Proto-Indo-European. The Indo-European family contains approximately 445 languages, spoken by around 3.2 billion people. It is the largest language family by population on Earth. Its branches include Indo-Iranian, Slavic, Germanic, Romance, Celtic, Greek, Albanian, Armenian, and Baltic, plus the extinct Anatolian, which contained Hittite and Luwian, and the extinct Tocharian from the Tarim Basin in what is now Xinjiang. The reconstructed homeland and time depth are the most contested questions in historical linguistics. The leading steppe hypothesis traces back to the Lithuanian archaeologist Marija Gimbutas in 1956 and was developed by the American archaeologist David Anthony in his 2007 book, The Horse, the Wheel, and Language. It places Proto-Indo-European on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the grasslands north of the Black Sea and Caspian, between 4500 and 2500 BCE. The archaeological correlate is the Yamnaya culture, which flourished between 3300 and 2600 BCE. The genetic confirmation came in 2015, when Wolfgang Hack and colleagues in Nature demonstrated that a massive Yamnaya migration into Central Europe around 2800 BCE replaced approximately 75% of Central European ancestry. The wave was sudden, sweeping, and male-biased. Reconstructed vocabulary anchors the dating. The Proto-Indo-European words for horse, equos, wheel, kekdolos, father, phdeuter, mothersteuter, and for, quetwars, all reconstruct cleanly. Because the wheel was invented around 4000 BCE, the language must post-date that invention. Horse domestication evidence from the Botai culture in Kazakhstan, around 3500 BCE, also overlaps the date range. The branching order is striking. The Anatolian branch split first, around 4500 BCE. The Tocharian branch split second, around 3500 BCE. The remaining branches diverged between 3000 and 1500 BCE. The Anatolian split is so early that some have called for revisions. Colin Renfrew in 1987 proposed an alternative Anatolian hypothesis placing Proto-Indo-European in Anatolia, with the spread of farming around 7000 BCE, which mainstream linguistics rejected. In 2023, Paul Hegarty and colleagues in Science proposed a hybrid hypothesis. The early Anatolian split happened in the Caucasus around 8000 BCE, and the later steppe expansion accounts for the rest. The greatest technical triumph of Indo-European linguistics is the laryngeal theory. In 1879, the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, working purely from internal evidence, proposed that Proto-Indo-European had 3 additional consonants, no living daughter language preserved. Decades later, in 1927, the Polish linguist Jerzy Kuriłowicz examined the newly deciphered Hittite texts and found exactly the predicted consonants. Saussure had predicted a sound he could not hear by working backward from its echo. Hittite cuneiform from Hattusa appears around 1600 BCE. Vedic Sanskrit was orally composed around 1500 BCE. Mycenaean Greek in Linear B appears around 1450 BCE. Proto-Indo-European was spoken roughly 2,000 to 3,000 years before any descendant was written down. The Indo-Aryan migration into South Asia around 1500 BCE brought Sanskrit ancestor speech to the subcontinent, displacing the languages of the Indus era. 2 centuries of comparative scholarship have made Proto-Indo-European the most thoroughly reconstructed dead language in human history. We can almost hear it. Almost. Every reconstruction in this video rests on a method developed over the last 2.5 centuries. It began with a single observation. In 1786, the British Orientalist Sir William Jones, addressing the Asiatic Society in Calcutta, noted that Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin shared structural and lexical features so extensive that they must descend from a common source. Jones could not name that source, but he had described the basic logic of historical linguistics. The systematic work followed. The German linguist Franz Bopp published the first comparative grammar in 1816. Jacob Grimm in 1822 formulated Grimm's law, describing regular sound correspondences between Germanic and other Indo-European branches. Latin pater corresponds to English father because of a regular shift from P to F in Germanic. Carl Werner in 1875 explained the apparent exceptions by reference to Proto-Indo-European stress placement, showing that even the irregularities were regular at a deeper level. The Leipzig school of the late 19th century, the neo-grammarians, articulated the foundational principle. Sound change is regular and exceptionless. If a sound shift occurs in one word, it occurs in every word in the same phonological environment. This made reconstruction predictive. The asterisk convention marked hypothetical protoforms. Ferdinand de Saussure's 1879 reconstruction of 3 Proto-Indo-European laryngeal consonants is the classical illustration of the method's power. He inferred sounds he could not directly observe by working backward from the pattern hands they had left in daughter languages. When Hittite was deciphered, Jerzy Kuriłowicz confirmed in 1927 that the predicted consonants were exactly there. The comparative method requires multiple cognate languages. It cannot reconstruct a substrate that has no surviving relatives. Languages like Pre Greek, the banana substrate, or the Harappan tongue can only be partially recovered using lexical residue, statistical analysis, or bilingual texts. Newer techniques, glottochronology in the 1950s and Bayesian phylogenetics from the early 2000s, applied evolutionary mathematics to language families. Bayesian methods now drive most major homeland and time depth estimates. Sound change typology constrains plausible reconstructions. Certain shifts, such as K to TS, are common across the world's languages. Others, such as TS to K, are not. The method is bounded by physics and probability, not by faith. Pull back and look at the 10 together. 2 recovery modes account for everything in this video. 5 languages, Proto-Indo-European, Proto Afroasiatic, Proto-Sino-Tibetan, Proto Uralic, and Proto Austronesian, were reconstructed using the comparative method. They have surviving daughter languages. 5 others, the banana substrate, Pre Greek, Harappan, Hattic, and Vasconic, were partially recovered through substrate residue. They left vocabulary inside successor languages, even though their primary speech communities went extinct. Hattic is the rare hybrid. It died as a spoken language, but survived for centuries as ritual liturgy preserved by literate conquerors. Harappan stands apart in that symbols exist, 4,000 of them, but remain unreadable. The speech behind the script is genuinely silent. A geographic pattern emerges. All 10 languages cluster within the Old World agricultural belt, from Mesopotamia and the Aegean through India and Anatolia, across the Pontic-Caspian steppe, around the Mediterranean, and out into the Pacific. The Americas, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Australia hosted thousands of pre-writing languages, whose reconstruction is beyond current techniques. Pre-Indo-European Europe shows 3 categories of survival. Basque represents full continuity. Hattic represents ritual fossilization. Pre-Greek represents toponymic ghosting, where only place names and a handful of loanwords remain. Mass extinction events for languages coincide with technological or demographic shocks. Bronze Age migrations replaced Central Europe's pre-Indo-European tongues. Urban collapse in the Indus Valley silenced an entire civilization's speech. Saharan desertification scattered Afroasiatic populations. Reconstructions can recover sound but rarely meaning. Linguists can pronounce equos but cannot read a Proto-Indo-European story. Substrate residues tell us what mattered enough to be borrowed. Agricultural terms, theonyms, place names, technical vocabulary for crafts and metals. The discourse, the songs, the prayers are gone. Roughly 30,000 to 60,000 languages have been spoken in human history. Around 7,000 survive today. Only about 10 have fully reconstructible ancestors at deep time depth. Even Proto-Indo-European is missing nearly all of its discourse. The 10 languages here represent the lit edges of an immense dark continent of human speech. The comparative method has a deep time horizon. Beyond roughly 8,000 to 10,000 years, random correlations, swamp real cognates, and reconstruction become statistically unreliable. Languages with no surviving daughters and no substrate carrier leave no trace at all. Africa illustrates the asymmetry most starkly. The continent has the deepest spoken human history of anywhere on Earth, with modern humans speaking for at least 300,000 years. But the reconstructible record is the shallowest, because writing came late and substrate residues are diffuse. The Khoisan languages, with the deepest split in the human language tree, allow reconstruction only to roughly 6,000 years before evidence collapses. The Sahel and Equatorial Africa have lost entire Niger-Congo subfamilies, whose existence is inferred from word distributions. The Americas hold similar gaps. Pre-Algonquian and pre-Iroquoian languages have been speculatively proposed from toponyms, but never reconstructed. The Amazon basin once held hundreds of small language families, most gone with their last speakers in the past 5 centuries. North America's mound builder cultures, including the constructors of Cahokia and the Adena and Hopewell complexes, spoke languages whose identity we cannot recover. Australia preserves about 250 living languages, with the Pamanyung family ancestor reconstructed to roughly 5,000 BCE. Beyond that depth, deep relationships are unknowable. Papua New Guinea contains roughly 840 living languages, most belonging to small families that diverged thousands of years before recoverable depth. There is what might be called linguistic dark matter. The languages spoken in Doggerland, the now submerged North Sea plain, are entirely unrecoverable. The same holds for Sundaland, the submerged shelf that connected mainland Southeast Asia to Indonesia, and for Beringia, the land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. The languages spoken in these places vanished with the rising sea. Even prolific civilizations leave no language if they do not write. The mound builders of North America. The Sungir mammoth ivory carvers of Russia, dated to 34,000 years ago. The Çatalhöyük painters of Neolithic Anatolia, working between 7,000 and 5,500 BCE. All spoke languages we can never reconstruct. The deep time limit means everything spoken before roughly 10,000 BCE, including the speech of the first anatomically modern humans, is permanently inaccessible. The same techniques that let us hear Proto-Indo-European cannot be extrapolated back to the Pleistocene. Most of what humans have ever said has gone silent forever, and the silence is structural. The frontier is changing fast. Bayesian phylogenetic models, originally developed by Russell Gray and Quentin Atkinson, and later refined by Remco Boucquier and Paul Hegarty, increasingly refine time depth estimates for major language families. The 2019 Sino-Tibetan study by Menghan Zhang demonstrated that Bayesian methods can settle long-running homeland disputes. Ancient DNA correlation is the second great frontier, language families are increasingly mapped onto genetic migrations. The Yamnaya migration for Indo-European, the Taiwan origin Austronesian expansion, the N1CL392 haplogroup spread for Uralic, the Back to Africa signal for Afroasiatic. The Reich Lab at Harvard maintains a database of more than 10,000 pre-modern genomes now, increasingly linkable to specific language groups. Machine learning is now applied to undeciphered scripts. The 2009 Rao entropy study on the Indus script was an early example. By 2014, deep learning models were attempting sign classification on Indus seals. In 2023, transformer-based models have begun analyzing sign sequences for hidden grammatical structure. Multiple teams are using AI-assisted methods to compare linear A patterns with the deciphered linear B corpus, hoping to break the script that records the Minoan language. Etruscan and Lemnian comparison projects at European universities continue to refine the Tersinian hypothesis. The Pre Greek Etymological Dictionary, building on Robert Beekes's Leiden work, continues to expand. Computational tools like BabelNet and the World Loanword Database accelerate substrate identification. Field linguistics matters more than ever. Documenting the last speakers of Formosan, Khoisan, and Papuan languages preserves the deepest branches of multiple families before they fall silent. The Formosan languages of Taiwan, in particular, are the closest living relatives of Proto Austronesian. The next decade may yield decipherment of linear A, possibly the Indus script if a bilingual is found, or if machine learning cracks the statistical patterns, recovery of more Hattic ritual texts from the still untranslated Boaz Kala tablets, and refined Proto Afroasiatic dating using newly sequenced ancient DNA from North African and Levantine populations. The limits remain. The comparative method may extend slightly past 10,000 years with statistical augmentation, but the deep human linguistic past, the speech of the first cave painters, the first farmers, the first cities outside the Old World agricultural belt, will stay mostly silent. Reconstruction is partial recovery, not resurrection. Linguists have the bones, not the conversations. Every recovered language depended on a chain of survivors, daughter languages that preserved cognate vocabulary, substrate carriers that absorbed lost speech and held it in their own grammars, ritual preservers like the Hittite priests who chanted Hattic for centuries after its everyday speakers had vanished, scribes who recorded foreign vocabulary because they had to, because the language they were writing had borrowed from a tongue they could not name. Writing is the single largest event in linguistic preservation. It postdates most of human language history by tens of thousands of years. The asymmetry of the lost in lost languages is sharp. The languages in this video are not fully lost. They are partially heard, reconstructed with enough care to pronounce a handful of words, glimpsed through ghostly suffixes in place names, heard as echoes inside the prayers of the people who conquered their speakers. The fully lost ones leave no trace at all. The Aegean Sassos, the Pyrenean ergative pattern, the steppe horse riders' equos. Each is a fragment of a much larger silence. The recovered 10 are extraordinary, not because they are representative, but because they survived the filter at all. Most languages that have ever been spoken pass through history without leaving anyone behind who could carry a memory of them forward. The deepest lesson is the most uncomfortable one. Linguistics memory is among the most fragile things humans have ever made. The act of writing, invented independently only a handful of times in our species' history, in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in China, in Mesoamerica, is what saves any of it. Without it, every language is one demographic shock, one drought, one migration, one collapse, away from silence. The 10 tongues in this video are the lit edges of an immense dark continent of human speech, and every language alive today is a kind of fossil in waiting, sustained only by the people still willing to speak it, and the systems still willing to write it down.